All right, so you see the video. There are like sky lanterns above the sky, right? Those like, beautiful lanterns carrying the wishes from people. That's a must do for most of the travelers to Taiwan. And however that, so yearly the tourists will consume 400,000 sky lanterns in this little town. But the fact is, 400,000 lanterns, what is it made of? Paper, but not like thin, recycled, soon biodegradable paper. No. So the trash, after flew to the sky, went down to the earth, trapped the bird, wild animals, or even sometimes motorcyclists. They just have to, take a look when they drive through there because something will go like just drop down from the sky. That's your wish, and so because of that. We found ourselves as a tour operator get some responsibility to echo this thing. In the meantime, in 2018, there is a young team. They came up an idea, say, hey, why don't we just started a sustainable lantern that is burnable in the sky, so there is no trash down up, and we can like improve the quality of the environment here. Very good idea. But in 2018, there is no single one sold to the market, even though they got successful crowdfunding when they proposed it. But non-single lantern was sold to the market. Why? Because this little town, everyone basically counts on traditional sky lanterns. So sustainable lantern is double the price, almost double the price than the traditional one. But the margin is, more than triple. So the locals won't easily change their options from the more money-making one to the more sustainable one. Easily understood. So that we think we probably could make some effort in it as a tour operator, since we bring so many customers there every single year. And that's why we started the idea of Wish Festival. That hey, let's make a festival, and then all the foreigners playing around here and getting the look of this minor the little train, and to experience the history, you learn some stories of this place and make a wish out together with alcohol. However, that's not really true. We met like several big problems. Is that first of all, locals don't support us, and second of all, the locals don't see environmental issue. They say it's actually a fake issue. Because what really matters to the locals is their aging population issue. Their kids don't go home. Their kids have to look for jobs outside of town. They rarely see their families. The elder people need people to take care of, to be company with, but they can't. So all of this is the main thing that they take care of, not this, lantern issue. Because lantern, no matter what, they are made up by paper. And the other thing is that there are almost 100 ladies picking up the dropped lanterns every single day, and that's the only thing they count on for survival. So if we change the lanterns from the tradition to the new sustainable one, we kill their income. Then what's our solution, right? So it's a very interesting example to see another complex situation in sustainability seeking. But of course, if you want to ask me what happened in land, is that of course we had some like governments to help us to avoid the terms that I don't want to have, and just make it happen, but in a smaller scale. Like, so there are only 300 something people came, and to make it small but boutique, and to make people realize, hey, it can actually happen, and with a quite good approach in the end. And let's have a next first official conversation. Yeah, so that's the story behind of this. So if you want to ask me about the sustainable tourism development in Taiwan, then this is one of, I think it's a really one of the good cases that for the local suppliers, sustainability is not yet a crucial thing for them to think of. But the market demand does improve it a bit. And that's what I'm saying. From the individual scale to the national scale, everyone counts to make this sustainable thing happen. And the next one is the case in Japan. And this is a case that's based on agriculture industry that's related to sustainability in tourism. It's called Satoyama Initiative. It's an idea of how they create this harmony in between humankind and nature. Let's say the landscapes in most of the places in developed countries are either protected by the national park, protected by the government, or be used as a, let's say, the produced land for agriculture. But agriculture sometimes can harm the land by the way you put the fertility, by the way you seek the water, by the way you kill other species to make your own fruits grow better. And there is no actual answer besides organic agriculture, natural farming, and so on and so forth. It's a broad idea that no matter which approach you have, how do we seek for this harmony? So with this harmony in the broader idea that make us able to put tourism, human activity, into this discussion. So it was an idea presented from 2010 in Japan by it's called Ministry of the Environment of Japan and the United Nations, the UN University Institute for Advanced Study, and so which is called Satoyama Initiative. If you feel like to, you can look into this term and look for there's a lot of videos, a lot of papers, works to tell you it's a very complete study and theory of how in each stakeholders, farmers, what do they do, tour operators, what do they do. It's not only about tour because it's always about agriculture first and the community and that. Okay, so here there are 3 circles. So through this harmony, they want to reach the balance, biological diversity, and the social ecological production, landscapes and seascapes, but also the healthy condition of this ecosystem service. Ecosystem service, if I have time, if I may, I would like to address a little bit more. It's an idea of how do you value nature when you use on that. When you use on that as a human, that's what I mean. So as a human, sometimes in the weekend, you need to close to nature, get rid of your stress from the weekdays. And have you ever valued the nature, or you just take it for granted? Here's a video that will show you there's a system and a concept that we all should take into consideration when we put nature as part of our stakeholder. And by that, so can you really put the actual cost when you deal with business? And that probably can explain why so many corporations worldwide just don't give a damn of this thing just because how we took this for granted, or how we just eliminate the existence of nature. And okay, now I have to warn you because the video goes really, really quick, even quicker than the speed I talk. So here I want to show you this idea of ecosystem service. And through this video, I want to give you a hint. How should you put this effort behind touring or operating a tourism scheme. Okay, let's check out this video. And it's not the last one, but almost the last one. Okay, and after the video, we will take a little break.
We see the same problem again and again. So rainfall cycle and water regulation by rainforests at an ecosystem level. At the species level, it's been estimated that insect-based pollination, bees pollinating fruit and so on, is something like $190 billion worth. That's something like 8% of the total agricultural output globally. Completely passes below the radar screen. When did a bee actually ever give you an invoice? Or for that matter, if you look at the genetic level, 60% of medicines were prospected, were found first as molecules in a rainforest or a reef. Once again, most of that doesn't get paid. And that brings me to another aspect of this, which is to whom should this get paid? That genetic material probably belonged, if it could belong to anyone, to a local community of poor people who parted with the knowledge that helped the researchers to find the molecule which then became the medicine. They were the ones that didn't get paid. And if you look at the species level, you saw about fish. Today, the depletion of ocean fisheries is so significant that effectively it is affecting the ability of the poor, the artisanal fisher folk, and those who fish for their own livelihoods, to feed their families. Something like 1 billion people depend on fish, the quantity of fish in the oceans. 1 billion people depend on fish for their main source for animal protein. And at this rate at which we are losing fish, it is a human problem of enormous dimensions, a health problem of a kind that we haven't seen before. And finally, at the ecosystem level, whether it's flood prevention or drought control provided by the forests, or whether it is the ability of poor farmers to go out and gather leaf litter for their cattle and goats, or whether it's the ability of their wives to go in and collect fuel wood from the forest, it is actually the poor who depend most on these ecosystem services. We did estimates in our study that for countries like Brazil, India, and Indonesia, even though ecosystem services, these benefits that flow from nature to humanity for free, they're not very big in percentage terms of GDP, 2, 4, 8, 10, 15%. But in these countries, if we measure how much they're worth to the poor, the answers are more like 45%, 75%, 90%. That's the difference, because these are important benefits for the poor, and you can't really have a proper model for development if at the same time you're destroying or allowing the degradation of the very asset, the most important asset, which is your development asset, that is ecological infrastructure. How bad can things get? Well, here's a picture of something called the mean species abundance. It's basically a measure of how many tigers, toads, ticks, or whatever, on average, of biomass of various species around. The green represents the percentage. If it's dark green, it's like 80 to 100%. If it's yellow, it's 40 to 60%. And these are percentages versus the original state, so to speak, the pre-industrial era, 1750. Now I'm going to show you how business as usual will affect this. And just watch the change in colors in India, China, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, as we move on and consume global biomass at a rate which is actually not going to be able to sustain us. See that again. The only places that remain green, and that's not good news, is in fact places like the Gobi Desert, like the tundra, and like Sahara. But that doesn't help because there were very few species and volume of biomass there in the first place. This is the challenge. The reason this is happening boils down, in my mind, to one basic problem, which is our inability to perceive the difference between public benefits and private profits. We tend to constantly ignore public wealth simply because it is in the common wealth. It's common goods. And here's an example from Thailand, where we found that because the value of a mangrove is not that much, it's about $600 over the life of 9 years that this has been measured, compared to its value as a shrimp farm, which is more like $9,600, there has been a gradual trend to deplete the mangroves and convert them to shrimp farms. But of course, if you look at what exactly those profits are, almost 8,000 of those dollars are in fact subsidies. So you compare the two sides of the coin and you find that it's more like 1,200 versus 600. That's not that hot. But on the other hand, if you start measuring how much would it actually cost to restore the land of the shrimp farm back to productive use, once salt deposition and chemical deposition has actually had its effects, that answer is more like $12,000 of cost. And if you see the benefits of the mangrove in terms of the storm protection and cyclone protection that you get, and in terms of the fisheries, the fish nurseries that provide fish for the poor, that answer is more like $11,000. So now look at the different lens. If you look at the lens of public wealth as against the lens of private profits, you get a completely different answer, which is clearly conservation makes more sense and not destruction. So is this just a story from South Thailand? Sorry. This is a global story. And here's what the same calculation looks like, which was done recently, well, I say recently over the last 10 years, by a group called TrueCost. And they calculated for the top 3,000 corporations, what are the externalities? In other words, what are the costs of doing business as usual? This is not illegal stuff. This is basically business as usual, which causes climate-changing emissions, which have an economic cost. It causes pollutants being issued, which have an economic cost, health costs, and so on. Use of fresh water. If you drill water to make coke near a village farm, that's not illegal, but yes, it costs the community. Can we stop this, and how? I think the first point to make is that we need to recognize natural capital. Basically, the stuff of life is natural capital, and we need to recognize that and build that into our systems. When we measure GDP as a measure of economic performance at the national level, we don't include our biggest asset at the country level. When we measure corporate performances, we don't include our impacts on nature and on what our business costs society. That has to stop. In fact, this was what really inspired my interest in this space. I began a project way back called the Green Accounting Project. That was in early 2000, when India was going gung-ho about GDP growth as the means forward, looking at China with its stellar growths of 8, 9, 10%, and wondering why can't we do the same? And a few friends of mine and I decided this doesn't make sense. This is going to create more costs to society and more losses. So we decided to do a massive set of calculations and started producing green accounts for India and its states. That's how my interest began and went to the TEEB project. Calculating this at the national level is one thing, and it has begun, and the World Bank has acknowledged this, and they've started a project called WAVES, Wealth Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services. But calculating this at the next level, that means at the business sector level, is important. And actually, we've done this with the TEEB project. We've done this for a very difficult case, which was for deforestation in China. This is important because in China, in 1997, the Yellow River actually went dry for 9 months, causing severe loss of agricultural output and pain and loss to society. Just a year later, the Yangtze flooded, causing something like 5,500 deaths. So clearly, there was a problem with deforestation. It was associated largely with the construction industry, and the Chinese government responded sensibly and placed a ban on felling. A retrospective on 40 years shows that if we had accounted for these costs, the costs of loss of topsoil, the cost of loss of waterways, the lost productivity, the loss to local communities as a result of all these factors, desertification and so on, those costs are almost twice as much as the market price of timber. So in fact, the price of timber in the Beijing marketplace ought to have been 3 times what it was, had it reflected the true pain and the costs to the society within China. Of course, after the event, one can be wise. The way to do this is to do it on a company basis, to take leadership forward, and to do it for as many important sectors which have a cost, and to disclose these answers. Someone once asked me, who is better or worse? Is it Unilever or is it P&G when it comes to their impact on rainforests in Indonesia? And I couldn't answer because neither of these companies, good though they are and professional though they are, do not calculate or disclose their externalities. But if we look at companies like Puma, Jochen Seitz, their CEO and chairman, once challenged me at a function saying that he's going to implement my project before I finish it. Well, I think we kind of did it at the same time, but he's done it. He's basically worked out the cost to Puma. Puma has $2.7 billion of turnover, $300 million of profits, $200 million after tax, $94 million of externalities, cost to business. Now, that's not a happy situation for them, but they have the confidence and the courage to come forward and say, here's what we are measuring. We are measuring it because we know that you cannot manage what you do not measure. That's an example, I think, for us to look at and for us to draw comfort from. If more companies did this, and if more sectors engaged this as sectors, you could have analysts, business analysts, and you could have people like us and consumers and NGOs actually look and compare the social performance of companies. Today, we can't yet do that, but I think the path is laid out. This can be done, and I'm delighted that the Institute of Chartered Accountants in the UK has already set up a coalition to do this, an international coalition. The other favorite, if you like, solution for me is the creation of green carbon markets. And by the way, these are my favorites: externalities calculation and green carbon markets. TEEB has more than a dozen separate groups of solutions, including protected area evaluation and payments for ecosystem services and eco-certification, and you name it, but these are the favorites. What's green carbon? Today, what we have is basically a brown carbon marketplace. It's about energy emissions. The European Union ETS is the main marketplace. It's not doing too well. We've overissued, a bit like inflation. You overissue currency, you get what you see, declining prices. But that's all about energy and industry. But what we are missing out is also some other emissions like black carbon, that is soot. What we are also missing is blue carbon, which, by the way, is the largest store of carbon, more than 55%. Thankfully, the flux, in other words, the flow of emissions from the ocean to the atmosphere and vice versa, is more or less balanced. In fact, what's being absorbed is something like 25% of our emissions, which then leads to acidification or lower alkalinity in oceans. More of that in a minute. And finally, there's deforestation, and there's emission of methane from agriculture. Green carbon, which is the deforestation and agricultural emissions, and blue carbon together comprise 25% of our emissions. We have the means already in our hands through a structure, through a mechanism called REDD+, a scheme for the reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And already, Norway has contributed $1 billion each towards Indonesia and Brazil to implement this REDD+ scheme. So we actually have some movement forward, but the thing is to do a lot more.